Okay, for this I'm going to show you how to do some edits in Photoshop. We're really going to just focus on layer edits, doing contrast edits, and color edits. So first you can go ahead and open up a document. So you can open up, select your document. In this case I open up a recent document, this landscape photograph. So the first thing you're going to do is you can go under New Adjustment Layer and select Levels. Hit OK. And you notice Levels is going to show up. It has this graph that shows you the value tones within the photograph, all the way from the darks to the lights. It's expressed from 0 through 255 in this program. You can see that represented there. And you can see it has midtones, dark tones. You can see it has a lot of darks. But if you move that over, you can see what happens if you reset the darks to what appears to be about 60 something. And you lose all that information if you go too far, but you can certainly bias your image and make it look more like nighttime, for example. If you go the other direction, you see this one has 255 in terms of the lights, but let's say you clipped out from 174 to 255, you lose some details in some key areas, and you may or may not like that for your particular image. And then you have the midtones. The midtones right here is represented at 1.0. But you can bias that to the left or right and make it a little bit darker or a little bit lighter depending on where you reset the midtones for your image. So this really represents the value tones that are captured in your particular image. Not every photograph has this full range. In this case, this image has that. Now the midtones, I usually don't change it much more than 10 to 20% or 1.2 to 1.10 is about the maximum without changing the midtones. I try to do some of the other edits through different ones. Now you notice it's under layers. So there's the layers window to the right side there. And you go under window and you can see the layer edits that shows up. And if you don't see it on your default when you open up Photoshop, just click on window and scroll down to layers and it'll open up and you can see that. Now there's this little eye, it's the preview to see the layer. You can turn it off and on. And here's the beautiful thing about non-destructive editing is once you've made your edit, you can go back and change it. So by clicking the eye off and on, you can decide if you like it. You can make some adjustments by double-clicking on the layer edit again, and then you can adjust your settings as you like. In this case, I'm just typing in the number that I want to change that for. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to go back to the layer, do New Adjustment Layer, and you're going to select Curves. Whenever I do contrast, I like to do two different edits. It gives me more latitude and more detail and more control. So you can see that the same value scale shows up again, but when you click on that little line and move it above the center point, that shows you how much lighter everything's going to become. It's proportional to how much further it is from the line. So you can see in this case mostly the midtones got lighter, some of the darks and some of the lights. Now if you move that point to a different spot, it will affect what gets lighter or darker. In this case with curves, you generally will have a gradual S-curve, a little bit lighter brights, or brighter brights, a little bit darker darks. But you can see here when I darken the darks, it gets to be almost black, maybe too much. Maybe I lose some details that I want in the overall image. In such a large part of the image, maybe I might want to change that. So I can try to control that by moving the point to a different spot. Now I can see the effects that I have for this layer by clicking on the visibility on there and seeing if I like it or if I want to make some edits to it. Now with any one edit, you don't want to try to do too much because sometimes it might just be unnatural the way it looks. So in this case, I'm playing around with it to see how much I can get accomplished with this particular edit. Now I can either live with that or not, and I might keep it or not. And I play around with it a little bit more. But now if I do something a little weird with it, this is where you might overdo an edit. I can make multiple points and move them all over the place. And I can create some crazy or interesting effects. Now that might be something that's kind of fun to do, but in our cases we're just going to try to do some straight edits where it looks like it's the photograph. And it's pretty true to the photograph. And if I want to remove the points, I can just click and drag them towards off the graph and they'll disappear. So I'm going to reset this a little bit more normalized. And then definitely adds contrast to the overall image. Maybe I'll back that off a little bit in the top, on the highlights, so I don't lose too many details. So now I'm going to go ahead and do another edit. And again, layer, new adjustment layer, and now I'm going to address the color. So usually I address a couple different things for color. Hue saturation is the first one I usually address. And working with color photography, it's really important that you do take a look at the color. Now here's the saturation bar right here, and you can move that really saturated, and I like to move it all the way to the end so I can see what I have in there and see what tones that are represented. Then I can decide which ones I want to bring out in the photograph and which ones I don't want to bring out. Now that's a little bit too much, obviously. It's a little too different from the original photograph, and that's what it looks like without the tone in there. So here's another way of approaching the saturation. I can choose different channels. So if I go under master and click just a particular color, I can see what colors show up. So in this case, this is a green landscape, but ironically there's not a lot of green in this image that makes up the image. So the pixel information that was captured on the camera and the lighting has been recorded not so much as greens, but maybe other tones. Let's see what we do with the yellows. Quite a bit of yellow there. So I can decide if I want to saturate a little bit more. And you want to make it look normalized. So if you do it too much, then it's going to show up like weird visual artifacts. You can see in here and over there. So you want to be mindful of how that looks. And when you enlarge this image or print it out, you might notice those things even more so. So even though it's a small preview, if you do too much, later on it'll show, and you want to be careful of that. Let's see what else we have here. These are the cyans. Wow, there's quite a bit of that in that information in there too as well. So that's where the greenish tones are coming from, is that blue-green tone that we have in here. So we can play around with that a little bit more. Let's see what the colors are in here. Let's see how much red's in there. So a significant amount is located in the reflection area. So I can kind of play with that a little bit more as I like. Now again, I'm not going to try to do too much with this in one edit. Okay, there's a lot more I can do with it. I can decide if I like that or not. And I can always go back and readjust it. And that's the beautiful thing about non-destructive editing. I didn't adjust the blues, so I can go back and give that bluer cast, make the blue stand a little bit more. So this image already has a lot of natural blues, so if I just move it over and saturate the blues a little bit more, we'll give it kind of a cooler effect overall as an image. And you can do the same thing for any of the other tones. So now the next edit we're going to do is we're going to new adjustment layer, and we're actually going to play with the photo filter. This is kind of the color cast or color temperature you might see on some other editing programs, but it's a little more powerful because you can then now bias the entire image. So in this case, it's a warming filter. This is the cooling filter. So remember, I had a lot of blue saturations. Well, even if I didn't, I can make everything just cool down in terms of the tone. Actually, this red filter is actually kind of nice. A little bit too much red, but I can always back that off a little bit. So I can play around a little bit with these different filters. And as you can see, there's a little color swatch there in the window that you can always change that. And then the density of the filter you can also be changed to right here by moving that slider bar up and down. You can see how you can really bias an image and change the way we look at it by the color tones that you put in there. I think we're going to try out a warming filter for this one. So I kind of like the red tone, but let's see if I move it up to maybe more of a red-orange filter and see how that looks. And I'll keep it on the default density and just leave it there and just kind of see how it influences the image a little bit. Gives a little bit more of a warmer light to it, and I think I like that, so I'll probably keep that in there. Okay, for this next section, we're going to talk about dodging and burning. So once you've done your color and contrast edits, you might take a look at this one area and it's a little bit dark, so maybe you want to try lightening it up. So we can't really see too many details in these dark areas. So what you're going to do is make a copy of your background image or your photograph, and we're going to do the edit to that particular layer. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and you'll see it show up in the layers. And then we're going to go over to our toolbar, and we're going to go ahead and click the the dodge and burn tool. So you can see it tells you the name of it as you hover over it. We're going to dodge it just like you would in the darkroom. We're going to go ahead and change the brush size. So the left and right bracket keys change the size of the brush. In this case, I'm going to dodge a significant area. If you use too small of a brush, it will make streaky marks. So you want to make it sizable enough for the area that you're going to dodge. I'm going to change the exposure of my dodging. So just like in your darkroom, if you're changing how much time you use for exposure, I'm also going to isolate not the highlights or the midtones, but I'm going to start with the darks first. So I put it at 35%, which is still pretty aggressive. I want to use a fairly soft brush. I'm going to go to maybe like 12% or 10% here. And that way the brush is a soft edge. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag. And you just click and drag it and make everything lighter. And you see how much lighter that area became by just adjusting the midtones a little bit. And do it again. And there you go. You can see how I got some details. I might decide to do the water a little bit just so it's not completely black. And then now I might do the midtones. There we go. And I can do an area there. And if you don't like what you did, you just do Command Z, and you can undo the edit too as well. I might do a little bit of the water here as well. See how that looks. And you can decide if you really like the way it looks or not. And if you miss a spot, you can always adjust it. Just go ahead and adjust the brush size. You can isolate an area. So let's say I want to do this tree area here. Lighten up a little bit. And there you go. You get a little bit more detail in those areas. Now you can do the adjustments in other areas too. So for example, if I want to go ahead and burn in an area, do the opposite. I want to darken an area. Use the left or right bracket key. And then you can go ahead and then darken an area here. And you can see it's kind of a little bit more of a splotchy effect here. But not too bad. You can see how that looks and it's affected the image. You may or may not like that. And of course you can do Command Z to undo it. I might decide in this case to change the exposure level and bring it down. And usually less is more, and you can just do several layers over it. So under 10%. And then that gives a little bit more subtle effect. And this is where if you're trying to do straight photography, it's a much more subtle edits that make it look more like it's realistic.